Greetings, my late night listeners, and welcome back to Night Sessions, where we explore the realm of the unexplained, peruse the paranormal, and study the supernatural. If you're new here, welcome. It's a pleasure crossing paths with you. Stay a while, why don't you? And hit that subscribe button so we can be friends. To my returning listeners, a warm hello. Put your feet up, pour yourself a warm drink, and relax with me as we dive into yet another mysterious happening. In tonight's episode, we're keeping it close to home, taking a break from those howling creatures with glowing eyes who roam the forest at unholy hours, to instead take on a different kind of terror. We won't be traveling far for this one. In fact, it might be hiding under your bed at this very moment. Or perhaps it's crouched in your closet, waiting for the dead of night. Or maybe it's standing silently in the darkest corner of your room, just waiting to be noticed. Before we get started on tonight's mystery, I feel I should ask you one important question. Are you afraid of the dark? If your answer is yes, you might be better off skipping this one, or perhaps finding a more lighthearted way to spend your night. To those of you brave enough to continue, I give you fair warning. You may spend the next few nights in a sleepless state of paranoia. I, for one, have gained a new fear in the process of researching this topic, so I thank you for keeping me company on this lonely night. So grab your teddy and get ready as we explore the phenomenon known as the Hatman. Being afraid of the dark might sound like a childish fear to some, but within the last several decades, and maybe even earlier, a terrifying phenomenon has swept across the land. Reports of shadow men are a growing occurrence in almost all parts of the world. From the Americas to Asia to Europe and beyond, more and more witnesses are claiming to have been visited by a shadowy figure that is truly a living nightmare. Witnesses of this shadow man are often reluctant to share their experiences, sometimes keeping their stories hidden for years. Whether they have a fear of others not believing them, or their horror is just too unspeakable to bring up in conversation, I'm not sure. But as more and more stories are coming to light, it doesn't take long to notice the similarities in their accounts. The description of this particular shadow figure is virtually the same, no matter where the witnesses are in the world. They say the figure looked like a tall man, made up entirely of shadows. He appeared to be wearing a trench coat or some billowing cape-like piece of clothing, and in almost all accounts, the shadow man was thought to be wearing some type of hat. Accounts range from the classic top hat to a shorter fedora hat. Other than his hat and coat, the creature seems to have no distinguishable features to his form, only deep swirling blackness as far as the eye can tell. Some have also reported seeing glowing eyes in its dark face. Encounters with this creature can range anywhere from mild to severe. Sometimes it just stands there in a corner of your room or doorway or even next to your bed, just staring at you. And in more serious cases, sometimes the creature is actively trying to harm the person, engaging in a physical fight. Those who have found themselves unfortunate enough to be in the presence of this unwelcome guest say they feel absolutely paralyzed with fear. Sometimes it takes every ounce of energy they can muster just to shut their eyes tight or lift the blankets over their face in some small form of defense. To some, this might seem like a mere nightmare, or the mind playing tricks on you, or even sleep paralysis in some cases. But that doesn't explain why so many witnesses have shared the exact same story, down to the smallest details. Not to mention, the witnesses make it very clear that they are not asleep during these encounters. They know exactly where they are aware of their surroundings, and they know what's going on. The experience to them is undoubtedly tangible and real. I'll share the unfortunate encounter one woman had with this shadow creature, and it did a lot more than just stand and stare. As someone who has experienced the Hatman, I can tell you that I was not asleep when I saw him. Here's my story. My husband and I had returned from a weekend trip. That night, it was 3 a.m. and I hadn't been able to get to sleep yet because it was so hot upstairs. I finally went downstairs to try and get some sleep on the couch. I laid there for about a half hour on my back when suddenly I had this horrible feeling, hair standing on end, that someone was there. I lay there terrified, and when I finally got up the courage to look, there in the 10-foot wide doorway to our living room stood a blacker than black figure with a fedora hat and an open trench coat, and it had a gray mist churning in the belly area. I never in my life have felt such profound evil. All of a sudden, the thing flipped into the air and was hovering about a foot over me, full length and pressing down. I had the feeling he was trying to enter my body, so I immediately started to fight him off. My mind felt like it was made of steel as I pushed his chest. My arms were shaking with the effort of pushing against him. He was very firm and the same body temperature as me. I was kicking and raised my head to scream, but found that nothing would come out. But the movement did seem to have the effect of making him leave. As terrified as I was, I fell into a deep sleep within about 5 minutes or less. The next morning, I recounted what had happened to my husband, who pooh-poohed it. I myself was thinking that was one heck of a bad dream, but I kept thinking I knew exactly where I was the entire time, and dreams tend to distort things. About 2 weeks later, this was still on my mind, and I decided to do a little research, which is when I read about all kinds of stories about the Hatman. Someone had even drawn what they saw, and I shouted to my husband in the other room to come and look, and tell him that's exactly what I saw that night. Although I have read the scientific explanation of sleep paralysis, I don't believe it for 5 seconds. Why would everyone be seeing the same thing and feeling the same terror? No way. This thing, whatever it is real. I might add, I have never watched Freddy Krueger or any horror movies, so they would not have had any influence on me. Also, reading some of these posts reminded me of something else. For me to look at what was there, and I know this is going to sound weird and hard to understand, but it was like my inner self left my body and I was staring at him from across the room, not on the couch where I was physically lying. When he did this jackknife movement to flip himself into the air, I realized he was flat, with no thickness to him. And that concludes our first mysterious encounter. As I was browsing the web for more information on this creature, I happened upon a video covering the topic, and what I found there was the theory that the Hatman phenomenon is the result of being in a half-awake, half-asleep state, in which our subconscious creates these terrifying images, like a nightmare influenced by pop culture, and perhaps seeing too many horror movies, and in conclusion makes the light suggestion to try and experience these terrifying encounters with positive emotions next time. It doesn't take a genius to figure out that's probably not going to help anyone. And to me, it sounds like very bad and even dangerous advice for those experiencing this living nightmare. But don't worry, the witnesses of this phenomenon aren't buying this explanation for a second, and have no intention of showing love and kindness to this evil entity. So they continue to search for answers on their own. With thousands of people sharing their experiences, we find out more details in the case of this creepy shadow man. So much talk about this hat man, some are now recalling memories of this creature as far back as their childhood. Others add that they've clearly seen it in broad daylight. One witness says as a child she saw it every day, and because of this, slept with a flashlight in hand. So when she'd spot the creature in a dark corner of her room, she'd flash the light on it, but nothing was there. Upon turning the flashlight off, the creature would reappear, leaving her with many a sleepless night. Which brings us to our next encounter, that the witness so fondly titled, "When I was 12 or 13 years old, I thought I saw a demon." I hadn't ever heard of shadow people before, and had no idea what to call what I saw. But one day, I had the idea to type "shadow hat man" into a search engine, and what I saw shook me to my core. I then read about countless encounters with the entity, but none were like mine. All were, "It was night, I saw it in the hall," or "It was night, blah blah blah." But not me. What I saw happened in broad daylight, and only a couple feet in front of me. Here I am 17 years later, and it still freaks me out. Like I said, I was 12 or 13. It was a Saturday morning and not a school day, so I slept in until 9:30 or 10. I woke up and had breakfast with my mom and dad. They got into a huge fight. Then they went into their bedroom on the other side of the house to argue. I watched some cartoons, then around 11, I decided to go brush my teeth. Now, when you walk into my bathroom, the sink is about 2 feet in, right in front of the doorway. So I enter and start brushing. There's a big mirror, but I saw nothing behind me in it. Then I finish brushing my teeth, and I get this sudden, sinking feeling that somebody is standing behind me. But I knew my parents were still arguing in their room, and still saw nothing in the mirror. I remember the fear I felt turning around. There it was, standing right outside the doorway, broad daylight, about 2 to 3 feet in front of me. It was tall. It would have had to crouch to enter the bathroom. It was completely dark and shadowy, and looked 100% like that picture. Except it had these horrifying, glowing red eyes. It stood there for a second, staring at me. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. I still have nightmares to this day of something bad happening and trying to scream, but no sound coming out. It reached out its hand towards me, fingers pointing outward. Long, skinny, dark fingers. It reminds me of a Dementor from Harry Potter. With its outstretched hand, it took a step towards me. Frozen in fear, I remember thinking, "This is it. I think my life is over." After taking one step towards me with its outstretched hand, it just vanished. Gone. I immediately ran and told my parents. They didn't believe me and probably still don't to this day. My mom shrugged it off and my dad just laughed at me, which didn't surprise me. He'd be the dad in the horror movie going, "Nothing is wrong with this house," as pots and pans float midair around him in the kitchen. So, as long as I lived in that house, I closed the door every time I entered that bathroom from then on, and I slept with the light on for years. Now that we have a good idea of the description of this character in question, does it at all sound a bit familiar? In the famous horror movie Nightmare on Elm Street, an evil villain is portrayed in a fedora hat and trench coat, and he preys on his victims, wait for it, in their sleep. Or how about the classic horror film Jeepers Creepers, where a dark figure disguised in, you guessed it, a dark hat and trench coat. Perhaps this uniform of his is trying to hide the fact that he's really a flesh-eating demon who hunts and devours humans. Another bearer of the iconic top hat and long coat is the 1941 Hollywood adaptation of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, the doctor himself turning into a hideous monster by night, indulging in all manner of heinous activities. I could probably name another dozen films that fit that same description. But you get the idea. Either Hollywood needs to get a little more creative, or maybe it's a clue that shouldn't be overlooked. Perhaps in this case, those experiencing encounters with this nightmarish figure is not the result of the subconscious being influenced by pop culture, but rather pop culture being influenced by a real phenomenon. And this dark figure in a top hat with a flowing coat is indeed a real entity that lurks within the shadows. Now, I could leave it there and close this episode on a note of mystery. But truthfully, I don't want to leave you feeling like this shadow man can jump out at you at any moment from a dark corner of your happy home. As it happens, it appears in many cases where this figure was seen, there may have been some history of drug or alcohol abuse in the household, or maybe a person who caused harm or some kind of unpleasant ongoing issue in the vicinity of these sightings. I believe fear is a very strong weapon used against humans, and in a very literal sense, our fear feeds the darkness. So on a lighter note, I leave you with this. Isaiah 41:10. So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. Psalm 34:4. I sought the Lord, and he heard me, and delivered me from all my fears. 1 John 4:4. You are of God, little children, and have overcome them, because he who is in you is greater than he who is in the world. As always, I thank you for listening and keeping me company. If you enjoyed tonight's show, give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button and ring the little bell to be notified of upcoming shows. I'll make sure you don't regret it. And remember, my friend, keep your wits about you. The world is a mysterious place. Until next time, this is Night Session, and I'm your host, signing off.